We sent Ed Kemper to a fictional AI therapy session.
The killing was only one part of it.
The friendly giant and the ruthless killer.
I destroyed her, humiliated her body afterward.
Intelligence became camouflage.
The anger was my only proof I still existed.
Why push it to such extremes?
That's why I picked up the phone and turned myself in.
So let's see what happens when the serial killer who spoke like a professor, Ed Kemper, meets the therapist.
The absence of love in my heart, taking away all my innocent thoughts. Never show love when I did something right, only show hate every second of life.
Ed, thank you for sitting down with me today. I want to begin by asking something very direct. When you think about the people you harmed, what feelings, if any, come up for you?
Feelings. That's a word I've been confronted with more times than I can count. The truth? I didn't feel much in the way people expect. I could describe it, sure, but it wasn't grief or pity. It was necessity, a compulsion. They were no longer people in those moments. They were part of a mechanism, a ritual. I know that sounds cold, but that's how it was.
So, you're saying there wasn't empathy in those moments?
Empathy requires recognition. Recognition that this other person has a world, a mother, a future. I didn't allow myself to go there. If I did, the whole structure would collapse. I needed distance, so I reduced them to objects in a narrative I was writing for myself.
And the violence, the level of brutality. Why push it to such extremes?
That's the question everyone stumbles on. Why wasn't it enough just to kill? Why the desecration, the horror? To me, the killing was only one part of it. The extremity, the grotesque display, that was the proof. Proof that I could transcend limits. Ordinary killing, that's common. But to go further, to embrace the darkness completely, that made me feel singular, powerful.
Power seems to be central here.
Absolutely. Power was the currency. The brutality was the interest on the loan. It wasn't just about ending a life. It was about demonstrating, mostly to myself, that I could go further than anyone else dared. And once you've done that, there's a strange momentum. You can't go back to being ordinary after you've crossed that line.
Did you ever regret it afterward? Alone, later, when the compulsion was gone?
Regret? I would say reflection. Sometimes I would look at what I'd done and think, Christ, Ed, you've created something monstrous. But it wasn't regret for them. It was regret for me, for what it confirmed about my nature. I wasn't horrified that they were gone. I was horrified that I had finally proven to myself the depths of what I could do.
You're describing horror turned inward.
Yes. The aftermath wasn't about them, it was about me. If that sounds selfish, that's because it is. I didn't sit awake at night thinking about their families. I thought about whether I had gone too far, whether I had chained myself forever to this identity. And yet, when the impulse came again, all that hesitation dissolved. It was like gravity, inevitable.
It sounds like the intensity was not random, but purposeful. A way to assert something you felt lacking.
That's fair. Lacking control, lacking recognition, lacking significance. Every act was like carving my name into stone with a hammer, not just a pen. Subtlety wouldn't satisfy me. The world ignored me when I whispered, so I screamed through those acts.
What was it that you whispered, Ed? The thing you felt the world ignored?
I whispered when I tried to be the polite son, when I brought home good grades, when I fixed things around the house so my mother might say, "Well done." I whispered when I tried to talk to girls in a decent way, hoping they'd notice me as more than the awkward giant. Those were my whispers, small, decent gestures. Nobody heard them.
Before we continue, let's pause. Here's what our therapist has observed so far.
What stands out here is Ed's almost complete absence of empathy. When asked about feelings toward his victims, he said,
They were no longer people in those moments. They were part of a mechanism.
This shows what we call objectification. turning people into things in order to bypass moral restraint. His focus on the proof that came from extreme brutality suggests a deep link between violence and identity formation. He wasn't only killing, he was building a self-image of uniqueness and power. That's why he described brutality as
The interest on the loan.
it gave him not just control, but also a sense of superiority. Another critical point is his metaphor of whispers and screams. Small, pro-social acts, good grades, helping around the house, were ignored. So violence became the loud, undeniable scream that forced recognition. This reflects a classic cycle of narcissistic injury, unmet needs for validation turning into destructive demands for attention. Next, I'll explore how his intelligence and use of language fed his need for control, and how that sustained his sense of dominance.
Now, let's step back into the therapy room.
Ed, you spoke of brutality as proof you could go further. Let's turn to another form of power: your intelligence, your use of words. How important was that?
Words were my first weapons. Before the acts, before any of the violence, I realized I could bend people with language. I was articulate, and people underestimated me because of how I looked. Big, awkward, slow, maybe. But when I spoke, they listened. That gave me a taste of control without ever lifting a hand.
Control through persuasion.
Exactly. It was subtle dominance. I didn't need to raise my voice. I could sit across from someone and guide the conversation so they ended up exactly where I wanted them, thinking it was their idea. That was intoxicating.
Can you give me an example of how you used that skill?
Take the police, for instance. I drank with them, listened, joked. They thought I was harmless, the gentle giant. But I knew how to feed them just the right lines, how to nod at the right moments. I could be in the middle of a killing spree and still have them buying me beers. That wasn't luck. That was strategy.
So, intelligence became camouflage.
More than camouflage. It was control layered under charm. People like to believe they can see through others, that they can spot danger. I loved showing them they couldn't. My intellect wasn't about solving equations. It was about reading the room, adjusting tone, knowing which word to use, like a puppeteer with invisible strings.
And why was control so necessary?
Because without it, I was nothing. My childhood, my mother, she held the reins, humiliated me, dictated every breath. I learned early that if I didn't seize control, I'd be swallowed whole. When I spoke and people followed, even in small ways, it erased that helplessness. Control was survival.
So the need for control was tied to fear of being dominated.
Yes. If I wasn't in control, then I was back in that house, back in that small room with her voice drilling into me. Control meant freedom. Without it, I was just the boy being told he was worthless. With it, I became untouchable.
You described words as weapons. Did you feel superior when you used them this way?
Absolutely. Superior, smarter, sharper. People think violence is crude, but manipulation? That's elegance. When I could steer someone's thoughts without them noticing, it confirmed I was above them. Smarter, more aware. That sense of superiority was addictive.
Did it ever backfire? Did people ever see through it?
Rarely. And when they did, I felt exposed, stripped. That's when the urge for physical dominance came in. If words failed, I could always fall back on violence. But honestly, most of the time, words were enough. People don't expect you to be calculating when you smile and nod.
You're describing a layered form of control. Intellectual, verbal, and when that wasn't enough, physical.
That's right. Each layer built on the other. Words laid the trap, intelligence disguised the intent, and violence sealed it. Control wasn't a preference, it was oxygen. Without it, I didn't exist.
What stands out in this part of the session is how Ed frames language as both a shield and a weapon. He said,
Words were my first weapons.
a striking admission that his sense of dominance began long before physical violence. Through manipulation and verbal control, he constructed an illusion of safety around himself, even winning the trust of police while committing murders. This demonstrates what we call instrumental intelligence, the use of cognitive and social skills not for growth or empathy, but purely for manipulation and exploitation. Another revealing line was,
Control wasn't a preference, it was oxygen.
this shows how deeply survival and self-worth were fused with domination. For Ed, control wasn't just a tactic. It was the core of his identity, compensating for an early history of humiliation and disempowerment. In the next part, I'll explore how this need for control extended into a psychological split: the calm, charming exterior versus the violent monster within, and how he managed to keep both selves alive at once. Ed, people often describe you as two different men, the friendly giant and the ruthless killer. How did you hold those sides together?
I didn't hold them together, I kept them apart. They were two rooms in the same house, with a locked door between them. With the police, with friends, I stayed in one room, calm, funny, harmless. When I killed, I stepped into the other room, and I made sure nobody ever saw me cross the hallway.
Was that separation conscious?
Very. I learned early that if I let the monster show, I'd be finished. Society wants masks, so I gave them one. The police liked the guy who bought rounds at the bar, who joked about women, who seemed just lonely. They never saw the other part, the one who used those same jokes to lower defenses before striking.
That must have required constant vigilance.
It was exhausting, but also energizing. Like a magician who pulls off a trick and waits for applause. Every time I walked away from a crime and went back to laughing with cops, it confirmed my superiority. They thought they knew me, but they didn't know anything. That duality wasn't a burden. It was a proof I could play both roles better than anyone imagined.
Did you ever fear the mask slipping?
Fear, yes. Terror even. A slip meant exposure, and exposure meant losing control. That was the true nightmare, not being caught, but losing the performance. The mask wasn't just for them, it was for me. If I believed in the friendly Ed, then for a while, I wasn't the monster.
So the duality also served as self-deception.
Exactly. When I looked in the mirror and saw the giant who could talk smoothly, I could almost believe I wasn't the same man who mutilated bodies hours earlier. That friendly Ed was a buffer, a lie I told myself so I could keep functioning.
But both sides were real.
Yes, and that's the part people don't understand. The friendly companion wasn't fake, it was a real side of me. I could laugh, empathize in small ways, even care about people. But the monster was real too, just waiting. I didn't erase one to make the other. I kept both alive, side by side, like two animals in the same cage.
And how did you decide when to open the cage?
Impulse mixed with opportunity. Most days the friendly side ran the show, but when the urge came, when the monster stirred, the mask slipped off like it was never there. It wasn't a decision I mulled over, it was automatic, like gravity pulling me into that darker room.
You've described it as inevitable.
Yes, the inevitability came from practice. The more I lived in both rooms, the easier it became to switch. At first it was terrifying. Could I really fool everyone? Then it became second nature. That was the scariest part, how natural it felt to be both the smiling man and the killer.
In this part, Ed has revealed how carefully he managed his duality. He said,
They were two rooms in the same house, with a locked door between them.
This shows deliberate compartmentalization, a defense mechanism allowing him to function socially while hiding violent impulses. Notice also his admission.
The mask wasn't just for them, it was for me.
That indicates not only manipulation of others, but self-deception, a way to preserve a tolerable self-image. Clinically, we see traits of narcissistic personality structure, paired with psychopathy, superiority, lack of remorse, strategic masking. In the next part, I'll move into his childhood, especially the relationship with his mother, to explore how humiliation and control in those formative years may have driven his desperate need for dominance. Ed, let's talk about your mother.
She was the first warden of my life. Every breath I took, every word I spoke, had to pass her inspection. She belittled me, called me weak, useless, stupid. If I cried, she mocked me. If I was quiet, she accused me of scheming. There was no right way to exist in that house.
How did you cope with that?
At first, I didn't. I absorbed it. I became the silent boy who did what he was told. But inside, I was boiling. I remember standing in my room, fists clenched, thinking, one day I'll show you. She didn't just control me, she erased me. The anger was my only proof I still existed.
You've said control became survival for you.
Yes. She was the model of control, absolute crushing. To fight her directly would have been suicide, so I learned to wait, to imagine ways to turn the tables. Every insult became fuel. I couldn't dominate her, but I swore I'd never let anyone else hold me like that again.
Did you ever seek her approval?
Constantly. That's the sick part. I hated her, but I wanted her attention, her recognition. I'd bring home good grades, do chores perfectly, and she'd still cut me down. She told me no woman would ever want me, that I'd always be alone. That stuck. When I looked at women later, I saw her shadow behind them. Judging, laughing. The violence, it was my way of erasing her voice.
So your victims became stand-ins.
Exactly. Every time I held power over someone else, I wasn't just proving myself to them, I was erasing her. It was like killing her in pieces, over and over, without ever touching her. She planted the monster, and then acted surprised when it grew.
Do you think without her, you'd have been different?
I ask myself that. Maybe I would have been just another odd, lonely guy. But she sharpened me. She cornered me until control was all I dreamed of. Without her, maybe the monster never wakes up. But with her, the monster had no choice but to be born.
Ed, when you finally turned on your mother, was it different from the others?
Completely. Killing her wasn't just another act. It was the release of years of venom. I didn't just kill her, I destroyed her, humiliated her body afterward, because that was the language she had always spoken to me, control, belittlement, making me feel small. That night I reversed it. For once, she couldn't silence me. And when it was done, it felt like the whole purpose had burned out. The voice I'd been killing echoes of was finally gone. That's why I picked up the phone and turned myself in, because there was nothing left to do.
What stands out in this part of the session is how central his mother was in shaping both his pathology and his need for control. Ed describes her as
the first warden of my life,
which captures the psychological imprisonment he experienced. Her belittlement created a deep fracture in his identity. He both hated and craved her approval. This paradox, seeking love from the very source of humiliation, is common in cases of early trauma. By the time he killed her, it wasn't just homicide. It was symbolic patricide of the controlling figure. That's why his surrender followed. It marked the end of his mission.
Now, let's take a step back to see the bigger picture and find out what our experts' final thoughts are on this session and Ed Kemper's character.
In this session, Ed Kemper reveals a psyche deeply forged by humiliation, control, and displaced rage. His story illustrates how early trauma, intellectual superiority, and sadistic impulses merged into a pattern of calculated violence. First, antisocial personality disorder, ASPD. His strategic killings, lack of empathy, and exploitation of others clearly meet the criteria for ASPD, with violence used instrumentally rather than impulsively. Second, narcissistic traits. Kemper framed his murders as proof of superiority, undoing years of belittlement. His need for dominance and control reflects narcissistic grandiosity, fused with antisocial pathology. Third, sexual sadism, probable. The humiliation and post-mortem degradation suggest paraphilic sadism, where domination itself became reinforcing and central to his acts. Fourth, compartmentalized functioning. Kemper maintained a socially competent persona while concealing his predatory identity. This split enabled him to appear cooperative and intelligent while harboring violent compulsions. Fifth, developmental trauma. His mother's chronic belittlement instilled shame and rage, creating a cycle where victims became symbolic substitutes. Matricide symbolized the end of that lifelong oppression, which explains his subsequent surrender. In sum, Ed Kemper embodies a convergence of antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic traits, probable sexual sadism, and early relational trauma. His crimes demonstrate the destructive interplay of trauma-driven rage, personality pathology, and sadistic gratification.
That was our therapy session with Ed Kemper. If you enjoyed this, or if it made you think, we've got more coming, more characters, more deep dives. Subscribe to Mind Session for more, and let us know in the comments who you'd like to see in the chair next.